Hello and welcome guys to another Super Rugby Pacific round review episode. Today we're going to go through round 6, and there was a round with a couple of big upsets and also some really strong statement performances and some nice teams getting back on track. Unfortunately, this weekend I only had time to watch the Australian game, so I'll only be reviewing those. Apologies to all the Kiwi teams and Moana. I will, of course, be doing a little bit of talking about the Fiji and Drua, seeing as they played the Western Force in the Western Force's big win. But today's episode is all about big analysis, so I've got 10 minutes for you from the Waratahs and Brumbies game about pod play and also attack and multi-phase attack, so stay tuned for that. But we're going to go speed through the games, the Aussie games, for their review right now. So first up, we have the Reds finally breaking their hoodoo in Dunedin. There is a bit of a pattern emerging. I don't want to speak too soon, but there are a couple of Australian sides that are breaking their droughts or loss streaks or hoodoos in New Zealand. The Brumbies did it to the Blues a couple of weeks back in Dunedin, and now the Reds have beaten the Highlanders in Dunedin for the first time in I think a little bit over a decade. So that's really exciting. The first half was obviously all about the Highlanders. They came out and played really well. The Reds obviously went over there, without a lot of their star power. So no Liam Wright, obviously injured. Fraser McWright, injured. No Jock Campbell. No Ryan Smith. No Matt Fesler. So it was really a test for a young side, and it was very similar, Les Kiss, to what Stephen Larkin for the Brumbies did in round 1 when he sent a less experienced side with some test stars missing over to Fiji in round 1 and then paid dividends. And now the Reds have done the same in a drought-breaking performance, which is really the highlight and the headline of this win, that they have managed to do so, and they've managed to secure this win without a lot of their key players. And I think that speaks to the strength of their systems, the power of their coaches to be able to imbue the entire squad with their designs, their gameplay, their strategies, and that everyone is able to follow it. There were some really strong performances. I thought Tim Ryan was really good on the wing. Angus Blythe really muscled up and became a little bit of a enforcer in midfield, particularly around the rocks. Welcome back to Lukan Solokai-Loto. That's really exciting to see him back in the fold. I thought Tom Liner had a pretty good performance as well at number 10, as well as Richie Asiata, who played huge minutes. So that's really exciting for the Reds. They obviously wanted to secure a win now against a Kiwi side, because that is what is going to be coming at them in the coming weeks. So it's really important that they start bagging these wins in New Zealand against these sides, but also, like the Brumbies, who left the Stars at home in Fiji and then came back and got beaten by the Western Force at home, and that's who the Reds are playing next week at home at Suncorp, the Western Force. So it'll be interesting to see how the reintegration of the Stars back into after a resting week will go for the Reds, because as we know, the Western Force have already caused one Australian Derby upset against the Brumbies in round 2. So we'll see what happens. Really exciting, but well done to the Reds. Obviously, Les Kiss wasn't stoked with the first half effort. Got pretty revved up and managed an expletive in the halftime chat. But nevertheless, they did lift and they came back to win that game. So really good from the Reds. They are looking like the best Australian side for sure. The next game is the Waratahs against the Brumbies, also breaking a bit of a streak there is in terms of losses against the Brumbies. That game was really down to, well, what it turned on really was the Wallaby talent again shining through for the Waratahs. They have the quality across the park to be able to be a little bit less organised and a little bit less structured, and then still getting away with scoring quite miraculous tries. Tristan Riley has been playing really well on the wing alongside Max Jorgensen, but Tristan Riley brings a different kind of physicality and strength to the Waratahs backline, which actually no other player really possesses. It's really, you might argue that Joseph Akuso Suali'i is kind of in that league of physicality, but of course he's still injured, and nevertheless the Waratahs still got the job done against the Brumbies. So the Waratahs are still not looking too well organised, but I will say that a lot of their big players, particularly Rob Leota, I thought had a really good game. Hugh Sinclair captaining the Waratahs, well done to him. Teddy Wilson, really exciting. I think he just needs more minutes. He is definitely a sniper, like in the vein of Tate McDermott, but I do think that as Dan McKellar has mentioned a few times, his coach, that he needs to keep working on his core skills, because if you do want to step up to the test arena, you want to be a test match animal at halfback, those scores have to be crisp, flawless, and absolutely at the top of your game. And currently, I still think that Teddy Wilson is working on those things, which is great because he's such a young lad, and I can't wait to see him develop. On the Brumbies side, I thought that they played really well. They definitely had a lot of the winning stats in their favour. Defenders beaten, line breaks, missed less tackles, made less tackles. So all in all, really good performance by the Brumbies. The Waratahs' quality and ability on click attack, or counter attack as they call it click attack in New Zealand, that is elite. Whether it's Tristan Riley on one wing, or whether it's Max Jorgensen on the other, or if it's just the entire team able to click into action and then to be able to go straight and be thinking, okay, how do I get the ball to space, and then how do I expose that space? Brumbies probably guilty of taking the the kick for goals early over the line out options. So they went ahead with 6 points where they probably could have backed them more, which ironically the head coach for the Waratahs, Dan McKellar, helped construct. Probably could have gone to that and scored some tries through that, or at least put some more pressure on the Waratahs, and that, in turn could have milked some points. So maybe a bit of a miscalculation there from the Brumbies boys, but nevertheless, really good derby. Congratulations to the Waratahs. Both teams now kicking on in the top 6, but the Brumbies really do have to start finding their ruthless form, as opposed to letting games like this slip, particularly against teams which were so much further below them earlier on. We'll explore that in the power rankings in a couple of weeks' time. The final game of the weekend is the Western Force versus the Fijian Drua. They absolutely thumped them 52-15, and what is most encouraging about this whole entire result is the fact that the Fijian Drua only managed to score 15, and the Western Force defense scrambled incredibly well, and there were actually visible signs that there were more players in and around the Western Force setup that were desperate to make scramble tackles, to chase back, to be able to put pressure on a breakdown. And I think actually Darcy Swain doesn't get enough of the plaudits and credit for his skullduggery at the ruck. He is actually elite at it, and I don't think there's anyone better, except for maybe Ben Grant, who had a really good game for the Waratahs currently, who is better at the niggle and scrap at the ruck, or the maul, to be able to then disrupt the flow of the opposition's attack. So that's really, really good from the Western Force. Harry Potter was amazing. His 2 tries really switched kind of the optics around him, because he hasn't had particularly great games in previous weeks, but he shows that he has got sneaky, incredible speed, and that is something that the Western Force really need, because they do have talented ball players in and around the field, like Ben Donaldson, Hamish Stewart. Each one can throw a good pass or be able to create an opportunity for someone else, but you do need players like Harry Potter with genuine speed able to finish those opportunities. On the Fijian Drua, I think actually that the travel is obviously a big factor, but they are looking like they are getting worse and worse disciplined for each game. And I'm not talking about the fact that they're not getting onside. I think they actually are getting a little bit too stuck into individual niggles, and a little bit focusing too much on making legal but late hits. And that's actually taking up too. It looks like it's taking up too much of their psyche when things are going against them naturally in the flow of the game. And I think that frustration is creeping into the group, because they haven't had a great start to the year. I'm hoping that they can continue to rely on the strengths of Ikanavere. Hopefully Darren Alangi's knee is okay, and also players like Salawa, Murray, and Dolakote, because they are all really important ball runners and ball carriers, along with Tanakai Vata, who played number 7 but sometimes plays number 8. They need those players to keep on getting them on the front foot. But I'm going to say this once, and I've said it again multiple times: Isaiah Armstrong-Ravula, but he does not need to be rotated out of 10. Give him the reins. The Drua look better with him at number 10. If you really want to have Caleb Muntz on there, put him at 15. But again, I think that the Drua have so many threats in and around the field that they need one playmaker, and they just give the ball to those threats players. Ponga Masi, whether it's Sama Vodre, whether it's Drua Sese, whoever it is, they just need to get the ball in their hand and out there. Because messing around with having Caleb Muntz and Isaiah Armstrong Ravula on at the same time is really handicapping and a lot of their threats that they have, and they need those threats with the ball in hand, and they need to get them in space. So it's not over yet for the Drua, but they are not playing particularly well at the moment, unfortunately. They started relatively well in the season, the earlier games, like not the first game against the Brumbies, but I mean, they did play pretty well there because they scored more than 40 points, but I think the game against the Hurricanes, the one that they slip against the Waratahs, that's really what stung them. A game like this against the Western Force when they got thumped, that's just sometimes they've just not turned up, and that's what's happened. We'll get to the review in just a second, but I just want to say on the Western Force, they will want to aim up and absolutely have a crack at the Queensland Reds next week, and that is a game that if they take, they put themselves in a really good opportunity to head into the back half of the season to be able to actually make a genuine push for a home semi-final, finishing in the top four, home quarterfinal in the top four. So it's not going to get them there, but it is an important step to be able to pick off teams above you as opposed to just the ones below you. But now we'll get straight to the review and get ready, get set, because it's going to be a good one.
We'll start off with the Waratahs attack. So here we see them starting around the 44, 43 meter mark. They first go to Joey Walton, who is the most common backline carrier off set piece for the Waratahs. He makes a decent run, making it just past the advantage line to around 43, 42 meters. The next phase is followed up by not capitalizing on the fact that he did make the gain line, but rather they go all the way out the back to Lawson Crichton, who does pretty well and breaks even, making it just to the gain line. But nevertheless, the Waratahs had the opportunity with Langy Gleeson and Julian Heaven here to be able to go back and attack the gain line with players in motion. But instead, the Waratahs are pulling the ball all the way back when they have forward runners running onto the ball flat, hard, and at the line, with a Brumbies defense that has had to step back because Joey Walton made the gain line. And then again, they've had to sacrifice this type of momentum. They have to build it up again. So here, the next phase, you've got Teddy Wilson, who goes to Hugh Sinclair, breaking even. That's fine. Basic setup. And then you've got Joey Walton again, who goes all the way back to Ben Grant, who's on the other side, their own side of halfway. Momentum is slow again. Then you've got Angus Bell here. And this is a really good example of how and why the Brumbies approach to pod play and their multi-phase attack is more successful than the Waratahs in the instances here, because Angus Bell doesn't look at all like he's going to use Lawson Crichton out the back, because his whole body language is shaping to take the ball, to tuck the ball under the wing, and to turn his shoulders inwards, which is impossible to throw that loop or that kind of throw back to the forwards practice so often. So then we see here, he just tucks it straight away, runs inside, and that prevents Lawson Crichton from being a valuable and also a viable option to be able to pass out the back. So the Brumbies players can just tee off and tackle and focus on Angus Bell straight up. And here we see Lawson Crichton again running a blocker shape with Hugh Sinclair and Joey Walton. But by the time that he actually releases this ball, Hugh Sinclair isn't an option, and the Brumbies defenders are nowhere near them. It's only Ryan Lonergan, the halfback, who's rushed out and put the pressure on Lawson Crichton to make an early play. And then the subsequent issue here is that Joey Walton and Tristan Riley are far too lateral in their approach. And because the Brumbies attack is, defense rather, is up and in, is the rush defense like that, they can get square hits on the attackers coming straight at them. If they're coming up and in and the Waratahs are going sideways and out, then that is a flush contact that the Waratahs have to work to not lose, really. And they're also going so far deep beyond their own gain line because, look, they are almost at their own 40 where they started at almost the exact same spot for the Brumbies 40s. They carry on the play here with Teddy Wilson passing to Langy Gleeson, who goes at the back to Lawson Crichton. He runs the line very well, but because the person here who's running the blocking line on the outside doesn't actually hold their feet, Julian Heaven, and because Nick Frost is rushing from up and in, he gets in the eye line of Gleeson and possibly also in the passing channel here of Julian Heaven. So before Julian Heaven becomes a viable option, Langy Gleeson has already had to think about the fact that might get intercepted, this might get knocked away, so I'm going to have to go out the back. And then Nick Frost is athletic enough to be able to swim through and take the ball here. And you can see that James Slipper, Tom Hooper are coming up and in and will shut down the space that Lawson Crichton is trying to put Angus Bell and Ben Grant in. The Waratahs here are lucky that there was a penalty because they had ceded around 8 meters in this play. And that's the difference. You're looking at the quality of the ball carriers in motion, the pods and shapes around them, the relative foot speeds of them. But you've got the Waratahs overrunning lines of time, passing too far back, not taking advantage of making the gain line. And also, there is an issue with lateral feet and lateral movement from the Waratahs. There's a lot of people going sideways and not a lot of people straightening with deception. And that's where the Brumbies, which we'll talk about just now, have a upper hand in this situation. Lolosio carries it well over the gain line and gets quick ball with Ryan Lonergan going flat to Len Ikitau, who Rob Valentini probably was a better option there, but Len Ikitau nevertheless gave it to Wright, who was then able to straighten. And that's got the Brumbies further on front ball. So now, but the Waratahs' defense is set, and this is where the biggest difference can be highlighted between the Brumbies and also the Waratahs' attack. Now we can see the pod shape here. Nick Frost, Lockie Shaw, and Noah Lolosio, all three are viable options to Luke Reimer here to be able to distribute. He distributes to Noah Lolosio. Noah Lolosio gets it, with Charlie Gamble unable to swim through like Nick Frost was previously. And then he's able to distribute. And again, Ollie Sassford comes around. He's a viable option to support the pod player there in Alan Alatoa, and they make the gain line once again. Again, similar to the Waratahs, a normal pod play, just forward carry. Noah Lolosio comes up. You've got Tom Wright, who comes into the line and then is able to distribute out. And that's where the Brumbies were finding a lot of space. Stephen Larkham wanted the Brumbies to go through the Waratahs in the second half, but nevertheless, the space was out there, and Andy Muirhead capitalizes on this by making it all the way to the 40, or just shy rather. Now it's the Brumbies' turn to be able to play deep. They play several block plays, and then the Waratahs' defense is held up nicely each time. They have to slow their foot speed and then re-accelerate. Tom Wright finds himself in some hot water here, but then manages to distribute to Corey Toole, who then actually makes it over the gain line. And that's the biggest difference, because all the pod players and all the blocker players were working and doing their job, running their lines correctly. The Waratahs' defense, coming up equally as quickly as the Brumbies' defense, wasn't able to swim through because the pod players are well distributed, like spacing wise, that is, and they were also able to have the options so the Waratahs couldn't actually commit to one or the other before the ball was passed. And that was the difference between the Brumbies defenders able to swim through and tackle the ball player who got it at the back, and the Waratahs players who have to wait and be hesitant about it. So next you've got Ryan Lonergan here playing flat to Alan Alatoa. It's the great management of flow. They make the gain line again. Noah Lolosio, a little bit deeper this time. Rob Valentini gets caught behind the gain line, but then Ryan Lonergan goes back to Billy Pollard, goes to Shaw, and because they're going back at defenders who have just had to realign and tackle, they've again managed to make the gain line. So here, they've actually made 12 meters of gain line success in 9 phases, where if you look back at 5 meters, they were also making about 10 or 11 gain line meters. So they haven't gained a lot in the subsequent 4, but nevertheless, they're moving the Waratahs attackers around. And that's what's really important if you're in multi-phase attack. You have to be able to paint different pictures for the defense, and you have to keep them moving and keep them out of their rhythm and make sure that they're playing to your rhythm. And this is what the Brumbies are doing really well by going back at defenses that have just reset and playing flat at the line. The ball slows down here. The Waratahs get a bit of a counter attack. The Brumbies reset with a pod shape that's really effective, and James Slipper goes through over the gain line again. They have now made 20 meters. The play breaks down here with Lenny Kitau making a break, but it gets called back eventually. But nevertheless, the important thing to remember here is where the Brumbies started, which was all the way back on their own side of halfway, and they're finishing just outside the Waratahs 22. It is 11 phases, but nevertheless, they always were going forward. They never once lost the gain line battle there, whereas the Waratahs were going backwards, and going backwards, and they lost roughly 10 meters by the end of that play. So I think if you were to boil it down to some really basic things, then you have to look at the fact that the Brumbies are able to control momentum, and that's coming from Nola Lucio and Ryan Lonergan. They're able to attack spaces where defenders are just getting up their feet. They're not scared to go back the same way that they just came from. And they're also having all their players running in pods and operating as a pod. Whereas the Waratahs players sometimes are operating as individuals, tucking balls too early, turning inwards when they need to be carrying straight. And that's just because that's the kind of players that they are. I highlighted Angus Bell earlier, who was running inwards and tucking the ball, and that wasn't really conducive to be able to make Lawson Crichton an option out the back. And being an option out the back actually alleviates pressure of perhaps getting a dominant hit made against you if you're in that forward pot. That is one of the benefits of running a playmaker behind a pod, because it puts the defense in two minds and makes them unsure about who they can tee off on. But if you don't have that and you're not running straight and you're not having the ball in two hands, then like the situation here in the Angus Bell example, you're not going to create any deception, and then the tacklers have no doubt about who they're going to actually attempt to tackle. The Brumbies, they're attacking a lot straighter, they're attacking the gain line more, and they're also pulling back with blockers in play throughout the whole run. Whereas the Waratahs were pulling out the back just because they thought that's where the space was. They actually had no set structures set out there, and they had no blockers running. And so the deception was nowhere to be seen. Whereas the Brumbies always had players moving around the ball. And if you were coming around the corner with Nola Lucio, Ollie Sapsford, or Tom Wright, their lines were coming out and straightening up. They weren't coming out and drifting sideways. But if they ever were, then they did have a player cutting in, and they had someone straightening the line, whether it was Andy Muirhead, whether it was Lenny Kitau, or whether it was one of their forwards. But for the Waratahs, their players were never straightening the line in and around the player that was going lateral. And that example is extremely material, or that point is extremely material in the situation with Joey Walton, who had to straighten himself. See, if Tristan Riley had switched him here or had called a straight line, then perhaps there would have been more deception about where the tacklers needed to focus and slow their foot speed up. But nevertheless, they really, really, really struggled with being direct quite early and quite often in multi-phase attack.
Thanks for watching all of that. I really hope you appreciated the analysis. If you do, if you wouldn't mind just hitting subscribe down there, that's really the thing that helps me, and giving me a thumbs up, giving me a like, because all those things help me to continue to grow the channel, to be able to reach more rugby lovers with more analysis, more opinions, and more news takes, and then to be able to listen to you guys in the comments below. I want to be down there with you and have a chat. Let me know what you like. Let me know what you didn't like. Let me know if you think that I got a bit of a take wrong. I'm always open to feedback. We're all human, and I'm just keen to keep on growing the game of rugby. So I hope you guys have a good week, and I'll see you for the Wednesday video. Cheers.